Every nation claims it fights wars for noble reasons: defense, freedom, justice. And every time, history shows us the real motive underneath: profit. From the War of 1812 to Iraq, from the Spanish-American War to Afghanistan, the United States has built an empire not just through military conquest, but through the systematic transformation of warfare into a profit machine. War isn't an exception to American capitalism. War is American capitalism. The illusion of separation is the most dangerous political mistake of all. We're told that the military and business operate in different worlds, that one defends and one produces. But they do not operate separately. They operate as a single system, and that system has made fortunes while soldiers died. That's why history is so revealing and so necessary. Every American war leaves evidence of who profited, how much, and what they're still hiding. And if you pay attention, you'll see that the winners of these conflicts were never the soldiers in the field. They were the contractors in the boardroom. Take World War II, the war that Americans remember as the good war, the necessary war, the one that saved the world from fascism. And parts of that are true. But here's what textbooks rarely mention. American corporations didn't just support the war effort, they profited enormously from it. General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler dominated military vehicle production. DuPont controlled explosives and chemicals. Standard Oil supplied fuel. These weren't patriotic sacrifices. They were contracts worth billions in today's money. The government guaranteed payment, profit margins were protected, companies could expand capacity knowing they'd be compensated for every dollar spent. Unemployment vanished because factories needed workers. But the wealth didn't flow equally. Corporate profits soared. Executive compensation skyrocketed. By 1945, American corporations had not just survived the Depression, they had emerged as the most powerful industrial force on Earth. What survived and thrived? Not broad prosperity for workers, though conditions improved, but concentrated wealth for those who owned the machines. That's the first timeless lesson. Wars are opportunities for those with capital to expand their power. And the government will guarantee their investments if national survival seems to depend on it. But the real transformation came after the war ended. In 1961, President Dwight Eisenhower, a five-star general who had just left office, gave a farewell address that shocked America. He warned of a military-industrial complex, a permanent merger of military and corporate interests. Eisenhower had seen it form during World War II. He knew its power, and he warned that this complex had become so intertwined with government that it could endanger our liberties or democratic processes. But no one stopped it. In fact, it accelerated. The Cold War, which began in the late 1940s, created a new justification for permanent military spending. The Soviet threat meant America needed to build weapons constantly, upgrade them endlessly, maintain bases globally, and whoever built those weapons became indispensable to government. The pattern is clear. In peacetime, businesses compete. In wartime or Cold War, they coordinate with government as partners, and partners get paid. During the Cold War, defense spending became the largest sustained government expenditure in American history. Eisenhower's complex wasn't a theory, it was reality, visible in every Pentagon budget. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics. These corporations grew fat on contracts that never stopped flowing. The lesson is not comforting, but it is historical. Once you build a system where profit depends on conflict, the system will find reasons for conflict to continue. And while the Cold War showed how permanent conflict could benefit contractors, the Vietnam War showed something just as vital: how wars can be sold to the public through deception, and who profits while that deception works. In August 1964, the USS Maddox reported being attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. The first attack likely happened. The second attack, the one that justified escalation, almost certainly did not. But President Lyndon Johnson used this incident to push Congress for the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave him a blank check to wage war in Vietnam without a formal declaration of war. Congress voted almost unanimously. The war expanded. Over the next 8 years, the U.S. dropped more tonnage of bombs on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia than it had dropped on Japan in all of World War II. Over 58,000 American soldiers died. Over 3 million Vietnamese died. What did American defense contractors get? Unprecedented profit. Lockheed received contracts to build F-4 Phantom jets. Boeing built B-52 bombers. General Electric manufactured engines. Textron made helicopters. Bell Helicopters sent thousands of UH-1 Iroquois machines into the jungle. Each helicopter that crashed could be replaced with a new contract. Each bomb dropped meant another order of ordnance. The war was, in financial terms, a gift that kept giving, all justified by an incident that probably never happened. The lesson repeats across every century of American foreign intervention. The public is told one story, while the profitable story unfolds behind it. The American Civil War offers an earlier brutal case study in how war transforms economies and who benefits. When the war began in 1861, Northern manufacturers seized an opportunity. The Union needed weapons, uniforms, boots, ships, and rails. Industrial cities like Pittsburgh, Providence, and Connecticut boomed. Iron foundries ran day and night. Textile mills worked triple shifts. And the government paid. Not just enough to cover costs, enough to generate enormous profit. A soldier's uniform cost the Union roughly $2 to produce. Suppliers often charged 4 or 5. Weapons that cost $10 to make were sold for 20. Rails that were already manufactured were sold as new. Some contractors cut corners so badly that Union soldiers froze in uniforms made from shoddy material that fell apart in the rain. Meanwhile, contractors became millionaires. The Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the American industrial elite built their fortunes partly on Civil War contracts. By 1865, the North had not just won the war, it had become an industrial powerhouse with its capitalists permanently enriched. What mattered in that conflict was not just military victory, but the system that transferred wealth from the public treasury to private hands. For the widows and orphans left behind, this was tragedy. For the war profiteers, it was the foundation of dynasties. It is a lesson Americans are taught to forget. Your own country has a long history of profiting from war. And when it happened, the wealth didn't go to soldiers. It went to those who could supply them. Fast forward to the 1950s, and the lesson reappears in a new form. The Korean War began in 1950 as a police action, not technically a war, though it cost 40,000 American lives and millions of Korean lives. The U.S. was unprepared, weapons were outdated, factories had retooled for peacetime production. So the government ramped up defense spending to unprecedented levels. Eisenhower, then military commander and later president, oversaw a military budget that never shrank after that. Defense became a permanent industry. The contracts flowed to established corporations, Lockheed, Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon. These companies became permanent suppliers to the military. They built weapons, lobbied for their use, influenced foreign policy to create demand, and grew richer with every conflict. The pattern was painfully clear. Once a corporation depends on government contracts, it has every incentive to ensure those contracts never end. If the world becomes too peaceful, demand for weapons falls. What looked like national security spending was, in truth, a permanent transfer of wealth from taxpayers to contractors. The lesson echoes from Korea to Iraq to Afghanistan. Defense budgets are not expenses. They are investments in corporate profit, and those investments grow larger when there are enemies to justify them. By now, the picture should be clear. Whether it is the Civil War, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, or Iraq, the same theme repeats. Wars create profit for those with factories and contracts. Government budgets grow to supply them, and ordinary citizens, soldiers and taxpayers, bear the cost in blood and money. The most chilling part of history is that this isn't just past, it's happening now. In 2001, after the September 11th attacks, the U.S. launched wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. These wars were justified as necessary responses to terrorism. In some ways, that framing contained truth, but the financial reality was stark. Defense contractors knew these would be long wars. Extended timelines meant extended contracts. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics all received massive increases in revenue. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost American taxpayers over $6 trillion, more than $2 trillion in direct spending, plus interest and long-term veteran care. Of that, a significant portion flowed directly to defense contractors as profit. Meanwhile, the wars destabilized entire regions, created hundreds of thousands of refugees, and killed an estimated 900,000 people across Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. For contractors, it was a growth opportunity. For families in those regions, it was catastrophe. The lesson was brutal and clear. When your nation's economy depends on warfare, your nation will find reasons to wage war. The people who survived best, who profited most, were those with stocks in defense companies, those with political connections to the Pentagon, and those with no stake in the communities being destroyed. Everyone else paid in one way or another. If this sounds far away, it shouldn't. In 2023, U.S. military spending exceeded $800 billion annually, more than the next 10 countries combined. This isn't defensive, it's structural. The money flows to the same contractors who have built fortunes over decades. In 2024, as the U.S. provided military aid to multiple conflicts overseas, defense stocks soared. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and others saw their valuations climb. The system that Eisenhower warned about in 1961 hasn't weakened. It has deepened. The revolving door between Pentagon officials and defense contractors remains open. Military bases remain scattered globally, and every geopolitical crisis creates upside for those whose business model depends on conflict. So how did America build the system, and how does it persist? History shows the mechanism. First, create a threat, real or perceived. The Cold War was a genuine ideological competition, but it was also inflated in public discourse to justify enormous spending. Second, build infrastructure. Factories, bases, supply chains tied to the military-industrial complex become embedded in regional economies. Closing them becomes politically impossible. Third, create political alignment. Defense contractors donate to both parties, ensuring that military spending remains bipartisan. Fourth, obscure the true cost. Defense budgets are presented as national security necessities, not wealth transfers. The public is told they're necessary for safety, not that they're profitable for shareholders. And here's the paradox that should wake you up. The system works because it appears to work. Military spending creates jobs, it drives innovation, it provides employment in communities with few alternatives. But those same jobs, that same innovative capacity, could be redirected towards civilian production. Infrastructure, medicine, education, green energy, and the economic benefit would be identical or greater. The system persists, not because it's the only option, but because it concentrates wealth in hands powerful enough to defend it. But military spending isn't only about contractors. It's also about control. The United States maintains military bases in over 150 countries. This global military presence secures access to resources, enforces trade agreements that favor American corporations, and ensures that the dollar remains the world's reserve currency. Every aircraft carrier, every submarine, every military base serves a dual purpose: national security and economic expansion. They work together. That's the deeper mechanism. Not just profit from weapons, but profit from the geopolitical order that weapons maintain. History shows this pattern again and again. So the question is not whether America has built a system where war and profit are intertwined. The evidence is overwhelming. It has. The question is whether that system will change. And history suggests it will only change when enough people understand that they're bearing the costs, in taxes, in blood, in instability abroad, so that distant shareholders can profit. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.